The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
I have. Oh.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's not afternoon out in California where my great friend David Nemec is, but my name is
1201.
1201. Well, my name is Alan Blumkin, and we're here today with my great friend David Nemec for another session of David Nemec's baseball history and statistics. And I found out before we started, I found out one thing today that a friend of mine told me that shocked the heck out of me. You know who has the second most extra inning home runs in baseball history next to Willie Mays?
I didn't even know Willie Mays at the most.
Yeah.
Second.
You'll never get this. I would never get this if they had Jack Clark.
Jack Clark.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not surprised. You know, I may have even read this while I was living in San Francisco that he was becoming famed for hitting extra inning homer.
Wow.
Jack Clark was a very underrated player. Yeah, and he's really a forgotten name. So I'm glad to hear that because I liked him. I liked the way he played, and I'm pleased that result. Yeah, with that bit of news. And you're right. I would never have guessed that.
I guess I'll go for 100 years. I could understand something like that, but if somebody asked me about one of today's players, I'd be lying if I recognized most of the names.
I'd be lying if I recognized all the teams.
Anyway, we decide we're going to discuss Hall of Fame managers, and some who should be in and some who shouldn't be in. Would you like to start this, David?
I would. You know, I have three guys who I definitely feel should be in the Hall of Fame, and I'd like to discuss them one at a time when we get to it. And they're not. I don't know that they all are popular names, but and I'm going to take them in chronological order. Well, maybe I would almost say four. I'm going to go back to four. I'm going to take one from the 19th century, a little-known figure named Frank Bancroft. Frank Bancroft managed the 1884 Providence Grays. And we'll take him up one at a time, but I'll go on to the dead ball era, who also was part of the 19th century. I think Fielder Jones, who's never gotten any mention for the Hall of Fame, would be a deserving candidate. And moving into more recent era, when a figure I know is also familiar with and might even agree with, Charlie Grimm, absolutely should be in the Hall of Fame. And we go to a fourth figure that belongs in the Hall of Fame without question, and why he's never gotten the credit he deserves, I will never know. And that is Danny Murtaugh. Those are my
I think an
four.
argument to me on that one, obviously.
No, I wouldn't think so. No.
But,
who are your guys?
Okay. I would bring in him. I would bring in. I agree with you on Grimm, although Grimm never had a team that won a World Series like Al Lopez. Never had one. Bill Carrigan, but he probably wasn't there long enough.
That's the problem.
And what about
Carrigan? He has a short career. Yeah, and then
what about Jim Muttrey?
Muttrey left the game under a cloud, and I don't think you can ever. I don't think among historians you can ever get the support you need. When the Giants were good, he was on top of the world, and when the 1891 season, coming after the Players League, there's too much evidence that the Giants went into the tank at the end of the season and kind of threw the pennant to Boston. So because Boston refused to meet the winner of the American Association in the World Series, whereas if Chicago had won, Cap Anson had agreed to play the American Association winner, which was the Boston Reds in 1891 in the World Series, and that may have changed the complexion of baseball. And so Mutri, I don't think would ever get. No, you'd never be able to sell Mutri with historians who know its complete history.
Do you remember how long it took them to put Ned Hanlon and Frank Seeley in?
I do.
Forever. They took forever.
They took forever, and part of the reason for both is they managed into the 1900s unsuccessfully. And Hanlon with Brooklyn and Salih with Chicago. In Salih's case, his Chicago teams were good enough, and he was responsible really for assembling the team that eventually became a juggernaut in the latter half of the first decade of the 20th century. Hanlon did not have any luck at all in the 20th century, and I think that was held against him, and Salih was lumped in with him. Otherwise, there's really no excuse for Salih not being in the Hall of Fame. And Hanlon, too. Hanlon was a decent player and a smart player, along with being a pretty good manager. And he assembled a great team in the 1890s, and so did Salih. And I think they both belong.
Well, it took 100 years for them to put William Hobart in. They put Morgan Bulkley right away, who...
Don't ask me to go there. It's beyond beyond credibility. But and Hall of Fame managers are like Hall of Fame players. There are a lot of guys that don't belong in there, and there are a lot of guys missing who do belong. And I neglected to mention what the guy who really I think also belongs in, and that's Paul Richards. I don't know how you feel about him, but
he never won anything.
Never won anything. But he built teams that were ready to win. They eventually did win, and he was responsible for really reviving the White Sox, and he revived the Orioles, and then he went to Houston, and those teams all under his leadership, not necessarily entirely as a manager. Changed direction for the positive.
That's not the criteria, unfortunately.
No, it's not.
Another one that comes to mind for me is Tom Kelly, who won 2 World Series with the Twins, and one in 1987 and the other in 1991. Even though both cases they were terrible road teams.
They were. The Twins. To this day, I don't think the Twins have ever won a road game in a World Series. I think they've been, they
didn't win one against the Dodgers in 1965.
And then they didn't win one. They didn't win one in '87 or '91 either.
No,
not that should be held against Kelly, but you're right. He's a very little mentioned name, and he took teams that weren't on paper necessarily the best teams in their league by any means, and he took them and they won the Elite Championship Series, went to the World Series, and they each won in 7 games, and a lot of it had to do with they're getting 4 games at home.
Yeah, and 2 other ones who won two World Championships who were not in Ralph Houck, but Ralph Houck. He ruined himself after he became general manager of the Yankees.
Yeah.
Because when he returned after Johnny King passed in 1966, he'd been the general manager and lowballed all the players who loved him in 1961, 62, and 63, and they all hated his guts. And then he went to the Red Sox and the Tigers without any success. But another one, which I'll never understand, is that Clarence Gaston won 2 with Toronto in 1992 and 1993.
and he never got another chance after that. Yeah, and
never got a managerial job after that.
Yeah, I have no explanation. I'm sure there is one. I hope there is one, because otherwise, it's incredible that he win too. Yeah, and really, but they were a good team, but he had to do something right to pull them together.
And they have three of the most prominent. Only won one World Series: Earl Weaver, Leo DeRocha, and Bobby Cox.
Yeah, to me, the longevity of Cox's success with the Braves gets him in. They didn't win the league championship series a lot. They didn't win the World Series. They won one World Series. That was against Cleveland in '95. DeRocha was a colorful figure in baseball for a long time. A decent shortstop. It was a baseball lifer, and he had a lot of attributes, and he also had some pretty severe negatives too. And but Weaver, Weaver was a colorful guy, and if you didn't know who he was before you went to an Orioles game, you probably were going to find out who he was by the time you watched an Orioles game, because he'd be out on the field at least once or twice, and not just about in a crowd.
Yeah, a friend of mine years ago worked a little bit for MLB, got a hold of a tape of, Weaver used to have a post-game show, and he had a tape of outtakes, and it was hysterical.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, he was very, very colorful, and and one of the things I've come into the conclusion, it's a lot harder since they went from one team to the when they split into divisions in 1969 to the way it is now. It's a lot harder to win multiple titles. Joe Torre did that. Bruce Bocchio, I think, is a lock. Because he won 3 World Series with the Giants, and maybe Terry Francona.
Francona, I think Francona longevity, and Francona did win. He's been a winner with the Red Sox, and he managed the Indians to the 16 series when they were still the Indians, which they still were. They could have gone to the nickname the Tribe. I don't know why they didn't. Just called them the Cleveland Tribe.
They could have called them the Spiders.
Could have called them the Spiders. It would have been, I'll never get used to the Guardians, and I think many in Cleveland won't. But that's a bit in the story for another day. But there were a lot of guys who were really managers over the years. But
I'll tell you another one they're going to put in just as soon as he's eligible is Dusty Baker. Even though last year, after all the playoff failures, finally managed the World Series team.
Yeah, the longevity player, and he's always been a player's manager. Really, and he managed to handle the Giants when they had both Barry Bonds and Jeff Kent, and he managed to keep that dugout intact. I mean, it wasn't in a crumbling mess by the end of his sojourn as a manager with the Giants, and it could have been because those two guys that were like oil and water in the same dugout. And I agree about Dusty Baker. Yeah, he definitely belongs. But I was going to, just Fielder Jones probably sounds like a real oddball. But he
only won once.
He only won once in 1908.
Was he managing in 1901?
No, he wasn't managing. He jumped to the American League from Brooklyn. He was playing under Ned Hanlon in 1999 and 1900. Didn't really care for Hanlon. jumped to the White Sox, who were then the White Stockings, in 1901 as a player, an outfielder only, and he was a good one, solid ball player, and would not make the Hall of Fame in a playing career at all, but he definitely was a solid player. And the 1918, which was the last Chicago team he managed, is beyond belief. If you look at their statistics,
a lot of them weren't there that year because of the World War One. They were. Jackson wasn't. 1908. You're talking about
1908. 1908.
Yeah.
He wasn't there in 1918.
Yeah.
No, in 1908, Jones had a team. Offensively, was beyond belief. It's if you examine their roster, talk about a player manager who really made a major contribution to his team's success. In 1908, that man was Fielder Jones, and Fielder Jones led the White Sox in runs. He led them in RBI. He played the most games of anybody on the team, and he was a regular, an everyday player, and let me give you the figures he led with. He led with 50 RBI. That was the high on the 1908 White Sox. He led with 92 runs. Second to him on the team with 68 runs, Patsy Doherty, Doherty is the only one on the team that had a slightly better year offensively in all areas. But it was 68 runs, a difference of 24 runs. And this is the player manager. And people look at the 1948 Indians and say, without Lou Boudreau, they wouldn't have, as a player, Boudreau as a manager would never have won the pennant. Well, without Fielder Jones in 1908 as a manager, the White Sox would never even have been in the first division. And Jones ended up at the last day of the season with a chance to win the pennant. And he had a choice. He really didn't have much of a choice. He only had 3 starters who were available, but had any success at all that season. And they were Frank Smith, Ed Walsh, and Doc White. Ed Walsh had gone 40-15, and he won 40 games. Smith was 16-17, but had a very, very good, strong year statistically. He had a whip below one, and Doc White with a whip slightly over 1. I was a left-hander, and they were playing the Tigers the last day of the season, and it was a winner-take-all game. Whoever won the game was going to the World Series. And Jones had a choice between Smith and Walsh, who had really been overpitched already, and White. And he chose Doc White because he understood. He knew that White had the most success for him over the years against the Tigers, because the Tigers were strong lefty hitters led by Ty Cobb, whose lifetime career batting average against left-handers was, I think, something like 290. I think somebody posted that somewhere. I saw it, which is way below what he hit against right-handers. So Jones chose White. It proved to be a mistake. The Sox made a number of errors behind him. White did not have a good day. White didn't really have proper rest. Walsh didn't have proper rest. And Smith had been in the doghouse much of the season, not with Jones so much, but with the owner, Charlie Comiskey, over salary, over a number of issues. And by choosing Doc White, Jones may have cost himself the Hall of Fame. Because if the White Sox had won that pennant, they would have ended up playing the Cubs in the World Series. It should have been a repeat of the 1906 World Series, and who knows what would have happened. But they had a team. Here are the batting averages of their regulars. Catcher Billy Sullivan hit 191. First baseman Jiggs Donahue hit 204. Second baseman George Davis hit 217. Third baseman Third baseman Lee Tannehill hit 216. Shortstop Freddie Parent hit 207. And without Ed Hahn hit 251. So the three outfielders all hit over 250. And the infielders all hit below 220. And the catcher hit below 200. And this was the team they were putting on the field. Granted, their number one substitute, their two substitutes, Frank Isbell and John Anderson, got over 300 at bats, and they were pretty decent, But they in fact they were quite decent. They probably should have been playing more than they did. They probably would have done better playing Isbell at first instead of Donahue, because Isbell was a natural first baseman, but they didn't. They lost that pennant. And Jones at the end of 1908 resigned, left baseball to go into the lumbering business in Oregon, where he was from, and I believe it was either Oregon or Washington, and stayed out there until the Federal League formed. And Jones was he liked the Federal League. What it offered? He liked the fact that it was going against the reserve clause, because Jones didn't like the reserve clause. Was very much against it as a player, and that was held against him at that time, and probably carried over into memories of many players, managers, owners, and writers, and the like, and was held against him in the future. This guy wasn't a real company man at all. He was against the reserve clause when it came time for the Hall of Fame to open, and he never got any consideration. But he took a team in 1914, the St. Louis Terriers, who finished last in the Federal League. He took the team over toward the end of the 14th season, and he brought it home second in the 1950 season, second by 1 percentage point. If he had won the 1915 pennant, as he well could have, again, it was the last day of the season.
Excuse me.
He would have had 2 pennants and the Federal League pennant. And he did take over managing the St. Louis Browns. And the St. Louis Browns were a pretty decent team. They were under a lot of suspicion, even before the Blackstock scandal, of throwing games. And Jones didn't like what he saw in the club, didn't like the feel of it, and he quit and left baseball at that point, never to return.
Can I throw a name at you?
Sure.
Pat Moran.
Pat Moran. That's a nice. Yes, a very good choice. Pat Moran, who deserves probably an equal amount of. You're right. He deserves an equal amount of consideration, almost to Jones. Moran was a good catcher. He managed the 15 Phillies. He managed the 1919 Reds, and Pat Moran won a World Series. Unfortunately, he died young. Pat Moran could have gone on as a manager, and I think he would have made the Hall of Fame if he'd been allowed the full scope of a fuller life. And another in that category is Dick Hauser, I think. Dick Hauser is a high teammate of mine. He won the 85 World Series.
Yeah, he won the division with the 1980 Yankees, and they wound up losing the LCS in 3 games to Kansas City. And Steinbrenner fired him after that.
Yeah, Steinbrenner said Hauser was quitting to take over other business interests in West Palm Beach. And Hauser at the reception where this was held and the announcement was made, just rolled his eyes so that all the writers could see, and went home and told his brother about it, and they just laughed, But Hauser soon took over the took over the Royals, and I think if he had stayed as the Royals manager, they probably would have. They did well. So they still did well over Whitey Herzog, but I think they would have done even better with Hauser. I don't know. Hauser was a popular manager. He was a player's manager, and he knew baseball very well, and he could teach it. But
another one who's like that, who received very high marks, especially the books that Jim Brosnan wrote, was Fred Hutchinson.
Exactly.
Because he won in 61, and then in 64 he had terminal cancer and had to leave in the middle of the season, and they wound up losing by one game that year.
I know, and they
passed away about a month after the season was over.
I know that was tragic, and Hutchinson is the last pitcher player manager. Probably ever. I don't think there are going to be any. There aren't going to be any player managers. Maybe a guy who can be a designated hitter now and then. Not
with the way with these guys.
No, not
the players that making millions of dollars.
Yeah.
You have players like Joey Gallo who are uncoachable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're making $10-11 million a year, and they have no interest in improving.
Yeah.
It's a lot tougher now, and can I go a couple of minutes on Danny Murtaugh?
Absolutely.
Murtaugh took over the Pirates, and about 2/3 of the way into 1957, he succeeded Bobby Bragan. And the Pirates wound up finishing in a tie for 7th that year with the Cubs, but they showed improvement, after he took over. And in 1958, this team was the laughing stock of the National League, from 1950 to through 1956 and 1957, came in second.
To
the Braves, and they actually challenged the Braves for a while. And in 59, they all got fat, because they weren't used to success. Friend had a terrible year. Mazeroski had a terrible year. And they finished 4th, 2 games over 500. In 1960, nobody expected anything out of them. And they won 26 games in the last inning that year, and they wound up winning the National League pennant and then stunning the Yankees in the World Series. And when I interviewed Dick Grote in 1985, I asked him about Murtaugh. He said Murtaugh had a calming effect after they got clobbered in games 2 and 3. Games 2 and 3 in the World Series that year. I asked him what was the attitude, and Murtaugh said, "We're down 2 games to 1. They don't pay off on runs here." Calmed them down, and he said Murtaugh taught him and the other players to make the ABC, what he called the ABC plays, the routine plays. And the fewer errors you made on routine plays, the team would be a lot better. He managed them through 1964. And then came back in 1967 for part of the season. He had heart problems, Danny Murtaugh, and he came back in 1970, and he was named Manager of the Year, which was ironic because in 1970 they won 1 more game than they did in 1969 under Larry Shepard, and then in 1971. He won a 2nd World Championship when the Pirates won the pennant, knocked off the Giants in the LCS, and then somehow managed to beat the Orioles in that year's World Series. I was at all 4 games in Baltimore, and the only one they won down in Baltimore was the Game 7. But and then he retired after that season. Came back
And I came back in '73.
73, and managed them to a couple of divisions.
They won the '74 and '75 division.
One of his great lines was when Steve Blass was having massive control problems in 1973. Murtaugh goes out to the mound, and Blass says to him, "I can't find the plate." And Murtaugh said, "It's been in the same place for the last 100 years."
Yeah.
But after they came in second to the Phillies in 1976, he retired. And a couple of months later, he passed away from a heart attack at the age of 59.
Yeah. I actually saw him play in 1947, and I remember it because we were sitting close enough to the field so that I could see him come off the field, and I was a very young kid, and boy, did he look like a ball player. He had a face that, I looked at some of the other guys, but Murtaugh's had baseball written all over it. And I remembered it just from that seeing that one game against the Cardinals. And I never saw him play. I don't think I ever saw him play again. When I went to Pittsburgh, I don't think he ever was still on the team. But
his last year was 51.
Yeah, and I saw a game in 50. I don't think he played in it. I think they had a substitute second baseman that day. He was with the team, and actually, wait a minute. Maybe it was the 50 game I saw, and where I saw him off the field, because he wasn't with the team in 47. Yeah, he didn't come to this until 48. So I didn't see him in 47. That was 50. But he had a real baseball face. You're right. I really liked him as a manager. I was all those guys. I was thinking in particular when Boudreaux ended up leaving Cleveland under somewhat of a cloud, and they brought in Al Lopez. I was thinking, and I wasn't alone. I know, but a lot of people I talked to were also thinking, man, we should get Paul Richards. We can get Paul Richards. Why can't we get Paul Richards? But Lopez was a company man. He finished his career in Cleveland in 47, and he was managing in the farm system. So they pulled him up, put him behind the wheel, and I think he could have won pennants. He should have won the pennant in 52. He won the pennant in 54, despite some setbacks. Dave Philly had a terrible year, and Strickland had a terrible year at the plate. And they lost in 4 games of the World Series. Lopez didn't know how to stop the slide when they lost the first game, and Dusty Rhodes' fluke home run. And Lopez never knew how to stop slide. And I was actually glad when he left Cleveland and went to the White Sox. And I was saddened, of course, in 59 when he came back with the White Sox and won. But the White Sox, I think, had a better overall team, so they deserved it.
Jim Howell, my friend in Pittsburgh, puts up. Now he's been putting up pitching rotations in both the group he has, the Sweet 16, which is before the first expansion, and in the group with the first expansion year. So this morning he put up the 52 rotation, and Bob Feller probably had the worst year of his career, except at the end in 1956. He was 9-13, had the worst ERA in the American League by any qualifier. He didn't start a game after he lost a game to Satchel Paige in early September of 1952. I did research on this a long time ago. And Lopez was quoted as saying that he was going to pitch Lemon, Wynn, and Garcia until their arms fell off. which is basically what happened. And when Lopez said that, Casey Stengel said sometimes it don't always work. And he was right. That both teams, that to me, 1952 was the biggest key to the 5 straight that the Yankees won, because both teams when September started, both the Yankees were 2 games ahead of Cleveland, and they both teams went 19-5. They only played each other once during the whole month, which I found to be very strange, based on what the schedules were like back then. And then the Yankees went to the World Series, and they were down 3-2, and they went back to Ebbets Field and beat the Dodgers in both games in Ebbets Field.
Yeah. You're right. I'm looking at it now, and when they needed an extra starter, they went to Gromec.
Yeah.
Who was
7-7, yeah.
And you're right. Feller's last start was on September 3rd against Detroit, and he lost 11-8. Yeah.
He lost. I think he lost the rain-shortened game to the Browns around that time, also.
Yeah, and in the last game of the season, Cleveland was out of the last game of the season, and they started a guy we talked about the other day, who got one start every year, usually at the very end of the season, and this was Dick Rosick, and that was his only start that year. And
the only reason I know about him is he's on the 1952 Topps as a high number.
Yeah, but
that Topps had quite a few players who never appeared on another mainstream card.
Yeah.
He was one of them.
Now here's an example of really Lopez. September 14th, they lost 7-1 to the Yankees. He started Garcia and brought in Brissy, then brought in Gromec, and he also brought in Early Wynn. Can you imagine bringing in one of your top 3 starters in a game you lose 7-1? No. And you're playing the Yankees, and you still have the better part of another 2 weeks to go in the season. And Wynn did not, as a result. Wynn had started 2 days before, and wait a minute, started 3 days before on the 11th. No, 2 days before on the 12th, and then he did not come back to make a start until the 19th. So between the 12th and the 19th, Wynn had 1 inning, and that was in relief. That is not exactly what I call good management.
No. I think one of the reasons Lopez got in is because he finished second so often.
Yeah.
Because he did that a couple of times when he was with the White Sox.
Yeah.
I think it's 57, 58, and I don't remember who was still managing. And they finished either second or third in 1960. They were second in 1964 with the White Sox. He had a lot of seconds.
He did. He did. Yeah. But
and
he had an incredible winning percentage as a manager. He had a .584 winning percentage, and nobody with that winning percentage and number of games he managed is not in the Hall of Fame. So, and that's because he really only managed good teams.
Yeah.
And
didn't he leave the White Sox for a couple of years when they had Eddie Stanky, and then they brought him back?
They brought him back. Yeah, after 65, he left the White Sox, and they brought him back in 68, and he managed a team. We talked about this, which they were right in contention. He didn't finish the season managing. He managed them in 65, And he had 3 straight second places with the White Sox, 63, 64, 65. And lost in 63, 64 to the Yankees, and 65 to the Twins.
Minnesota, because Stanky was there when they lost in 67.
Yeah. And then he came back in 68, and he had, I don't know, it's a weird breakdown, but he wasn't there for the full season. And he was there part of 69, and that was his coda. And but let me see, for a full season he only had, I think I'm looking, he only had one team that finished in the second division, and they were above 800. That was the 62 White Sox with 85-77, finished fifth. So he was in first, second, or third, and first and second in almost every season. So every full season. So my God, I'm not wrong. Yeah, I think. Wait a minute. In 60, 61, 62, he finished third, fourth, and fifth out of the first division. That was the only year, and that was the only year he finished lowest third, and it was in 60 and fourth and 61. Everything else was first and second for a full season. And he had a good team. He had teams that should have won more pennants, no question. Yeah. And he was lucky. Richards was not lucky. And so one is in the Hall of Fame and the other is a name today. And a name not well remembered by, I'm sure, by a lot of Prairie fans. Too bad.
And, you think Gene Mark was comparable to Richards? You could get a team so far, but they never could cross the line to win anything.
I know. Well, Mark kind of panicked. There's no sign that Richards ever panicked. Richards really never got that close. So we don't know what Richards would have done if it had come down to the final week of the season. But we know that he was capable of building a team and corralling good players. And he was a great strategizer, and he got the most out of what talent he had. Mark, I think was a pretty good manager, but he has to live with that Angels team that lost in the LCS and the Phillies team that lost in '64, and that's unfortunate. Otherwise, he had all the signs of being a pretty good manager.
Another one I'd like to bring up is Billy Martin. It was undone by his own demons.
Yeah, I saw one of the last games he managed. I was sitting right behind the Yankees dugout in the Tiger Stadium, and the Tigers came to the bottom of the ninth, and there were 3 runs down, and they got the bases loaded, and Martin went to the pen, brought in, what was the guy's name, Guante or something like that?
The Cecile Guante. Actually, I gave him the name Grand Slam Guante after they suffered the Grand Slam home run. I saw that home run. Alan Trammell came up with the bases loaded, and I'm sitting right behind the Yankees dugout. We had moved down from, I was with my nephew and my sister, and we had moved down from a seat way up in the grandstand, right down to the Yankees dugout. A lot of fans had left, thinking the Tigers were out of it. And Trammel's up there with the bases, Guante's on the mound, and Trammell puts one in the left field seats, walk-off grand slam, only one I saw that on TV, yeah.
Yeah, only one I've ever seen. And Billy Martin turned around to look, and the look on his face was the most stricken look I've ever seen on a human being's face who was not facing something like the firing squad, because it was incredible. He knew that, my God, this is it. I'm going to get fired, and and he did. And he never came back to the Yankees after that. So I know that, and I don't think I think that might have been pretty much the end of it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, that probably happened in 1989 because he got killed in the automobile accident that winter.
So then, yeah, 78. And so 88 was the end of his career.
Yeah.
And and ended pretty early that season because this was in May, I think, or early June, that game. I have to pull it up to see the exact date, but my sister and nephew were gleeful because won, and I was incredulous that the Yankees had lost, and Galante kind of, I remember how his shoulders just sagged and he kind of just crept off the field, and in baseball, there's one thing in baseball you just never see, and I've never seen it in any form of baseball, except when I was playing, like, not even in college do I call team, where the winning team and losing team, not even in the World Series, you see them gather on the field at the end of the last inning or last game and shake hands. Every other sport.
Hockey, wow.
Every other major sport. Hockey, basketball, football. They gather on the field and shake hands. Baseball, you never see it. You never even see the losing team appear on the field if they can avoid it. Now, I've never had anyone explain to me why this is a lifetime tradition as far as the early baseball. Nobody remembers it ever occurring in a game. And,
well, they used to have a non-fraternization rule years ago.
And but that's not fraternization when the game is over and players dispersing for the off season after a World Series. The fraternization rule would certainly apply if they were doing this before a game
Can you imagine the Dodgers having to stay on the field after Thompson home run or the Yankees after the Mazeroski home run?
Right. You didn't see anything.
No.
You were there. Did you even see a Yankee on the field after?
No, they just walked off the field and
walked off the field. That was it. Yeah.
And the ones who were there in 1955 when they lost to the Dodgers took the Pirate loss a lot harder.
Yeah.
And Jackie Robinson in 51 just stood there making sure that Thompson touched every base.
Yeah, and he was probably all alone on the field.
He was.
Field. Yeah.
Well, because they were walking because the center field and the polo grounds was all the way in the outfield, the clubhouse.
Yeah. And no one has ever explained to me when that became a tradition or why it became a tradition, and how it became a tradition in every other major professional sport. I don't know. I don't watch soccer, so I don't know if it happens after.
No, I don't watch either.
Soccer matches or not.
David, I have to end that. I'm getting an important call.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you. It was a pleasure as usual.
And it was. So, okay, take care. And
all right, give my best to Marilyn, and we'll see you. You let me know when you're ready to do the next one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.